Okay, so one of the great things about 360 cameras is the way in which you have total flexibility for reframing the footage afterwards. So I thought what I'd do is a tutorial about how I create a montage of a trip out with my local kayaking club using the GoPro Max2 360 camera, though everything that I say here is also applicable to Insta360's cameras and the Osmo 360 as well. So I'm going to go through the reframing, how I set up my project, and also the grading process as well with the GP-Log color profile. So I've put together this little video. It's the kind of thing that anybody might shoot when they're out with friends on mountain bikes or cycling, or in my case, out boating. And I didn't want to focus too much on the camera on the day, and that's one of the beauties of 360 cameras. So everything that I took in this montage is taken from my helmet mount. So before I go into how I put this project together and how I reframed the footage, here is the montage itself.
That was smooth.
Okay, so I've got the footage that I shot with the GoPro Max2, and I need to process this before I bring it into Resolve so that I can use the GoPro Reframe plugin. Now, you can do your reframes within GoPro Player, but I prefer the control I get within Resolve directly now that I can do it within the software. But before I can do that, I need to convert my 360 footage into equirectangular format. There is a future update coming from GoPro that will allow the native 360 files to be handled within Resolve, but it hasn't arrived yet. Now, if you want to use the GoPro Reframe plugin with any other footage from different cameras, because it's not GoPro specific, you can use this with the Insta360 cameras and the DJI ones as well. You'll still need to go through this process within the DJI Studio software and the Insta360 software as well, so that the plugin can handle the footage. So I've got my footage here. There's all the 360 formats that I've got, and I've got quite a few of these shots. So I'm just going to drag this footage into GoPro Player. And because there's so much footage, I don't want to have to go through each individual one and convert them individually, and the GoPro Player software has recognized this, so it's given me the option to open in the Batch Explorer, which I'm going to do. I have actually pre-converted these, but I'm just going to show you what I did. So you can see they've all appeared in a list within the player software. I can highlight them all and then I can select the format that I want. I want it 8K. For this, I'm using HEVC. You can export as ProRes, which gives you better quality, and it also makes it a bit easier for the computer system to handle as well. But I'm going with HEVC simply because I want to save drive space, because these 360 files at 8K take up a heck of a lot of space. I'm running a bit short at the moment. I need some new drives, but it's still 10-bit depth, and I'm going to put the bitrate up to maximum as well. Now, because my footage is POV, I shot it on my kayak helmet, I generally want it to be looking where I'm looking with my head. I'm still going to have access to all of the 360 image, but for the most part, I want to have it follow my head. I don't want to have to keyframe my POV within Resolve, so I'm going to turn direction lock off. I'm leaving anti-shake on. You can put mount optimization on. I haven't really noticed it making much of a difference, to be honest. And then you just apply the changes, and that will apply to all of these clips that I've got selected. And then you just start and it will just process them away. Doing it this way, because we haven't gone through any reframing process, it will automatically export that file as an equirectangular format video. And I can show you the result of that in my conversions here. If I open this up in QuickTime, you can see that is the equirectangular format that we need in order to be able to use this footage within Resolve or Premiere, because the GoPro plugin originally came out for Premiere, but this is a Resolve focused tutorial. So that's the format we need. Okay, so we go into Resolve. Now, I'm going to set up my project and my master settings. I want it in 4K, but because Resolve is resolution independent, we can set this to 1080 or lower if we're having problems with our computer handling the playback of these files, because this is quite processor intensive. My frame rate is 23.976 because that's the frame rate that I recorded the footage in. My color management, DaVinci YRGB. Timeline color space is DaVinci Gamut Intermediate, and my output color space is Rec 799A. Those of you who've seen my grading tutorial for the DJI D-Log M will know that I suggested going to sRGB on your output, and I didn't really go for the Rec 799A because it didn't really have much of an effect once things were uploaded to YouTube. That used to be the case, but now I've discovered we need to work with Rec 709A in order to ensure consistency across browsers once we've uploaded our video to YouTube. So that's my basic setup for my project. Now, got my kayaking footage here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit my montage with the equirectangular format. I'm not going to do my reframing just yet. I can see the events that happen on the footage. You know, it's not the nicest way to view your footage because it looks a bit odd, but I'm going to do my reframing last. Now, you might prefer to do it first, but in this instance, I'm going to do my reframing after I've put my basic edit together. Now, when I edit these montages together, I like to choose my music first because I like to edit to the music. And I've found this one piece from Epidemic Sound. I use Epidemic Sound because I found it gives me a good choice of music. It's not the cheapest around, but it gives me a good choice of music, has some really high quality stuff on there. And importantly, it works within Resolve. So I can bring up my Epidemic Sound account here, and I can search for and play music and preview it and save things to favorites. And then I can just download the music, and it'll go straight into Resolve. So that's one reason I use Epidemic instead of some of the other services like Audio. But you know, that's entirely up to you how you want your music. But yeah, I like to have it on my timeline, and then once I put it on my timeline, I can use the live trim here to go to the duration that I want. And I've decided that I want my montage to be around 1.5 minutes long. That might change depending on how well the footage works within my edits. And to make things a bit easier as well, to edit the music, I can right click on the music and click on show music beats, and then Resolve will just go through the music and analyze it, and it will bring up these illustrations here, these markers, which show me where the beats of the music are, which is extremely useful for editing this kind of short montage. So I'm now going to edit my footage, and I will come back to you and we'll go through some of my grading, and also importantly the reframing of the 360 images as well. So I'll catch you up in a bit when I've done that. So back in the room, I've just done an edit, and I've done quite a bit with this edit, but I want to take you through a few shots to show you how to use the GoPro Reframe plugin within Resolve. So I've got this shot here, and it's all edited, is in the timeline, as you can see, and it's in the equi-rectangular format, so it looks a bit weird. Now, editing in this way with the shots like this is slightly weird, but it's completely doable. I like to do my reframing afterwards, and I'll show you why as we go along. Okay, so there is a slight limitation with the free version of Resolve if you're using that, in that it's limited to 4K maximum resolution, and the files that the GoPro Max and the likes of the Osmo 360 put out, and as well as into 360 cameras, are 8K resolution, but you're only going to be viewing them in a 4K maximum timeline anyway, generally. But one thing that GoPro does recommend is going into image scaling here and setting the mismatched resolution files to center crop with no resizing. Now that crop setting is going to become important anyway in just a moment. Okay, so one thing to note is that the GoPro Reframe plugin is not dragged into your video on the main timeline. That's not how it works. It can work that way though, but that's for another tutorial. Instead, we need to highlight our clip and we need to go into the Fusion tab. Now, I know this might set off nightmares for people. Fusion is not the most intuitive effects system in the world, but luckily using the Reframe plugin within it is pretty simple. So when you've installed it, you need to just right click and add tool and go to the GoPro Reframe, and that creates us a new node here with the Reframe plugin. Then we need to set our projection. So because I'm working in ultra high definition in 16:9, that's what I want. So I'm going to select that, and you can see now that we've got this center crop. So it's reframed the image in a basic way, and we've got all this space all around the image here. Now, just a note that by default, Fusion will give you these two windows, and that makes this one even smaller. So I like to click on this, and we get this as our main window for the purposes of using this here. We can control our pan and our tilts. So what I'm going to do for this shot is, because it's a POV shot, I want a really wide angle of view. I want to create that sensation of speed as well, as much as I can. And I also want to remove the fisheye distortion. And that's one thing that I really love about these 360 cameras, is that you have that so much real estate in the image that you can completely get rid of all that fisheye distortion. I am going to be running another tutorial, even more advanced, coming soon, that shows you how to get ultimate POV shots with your normal action camera, not a 360 camera. But 360 cameras are amazing for this type of video where I'm filming POV, but I also want to capture stuff that happens with my friends as well. So the video isn't all about me, and the 360 cameras allow you to do that, and that's something I'm going to come to in a moment with a different shot. So to get my wide POV, I'm going to bring this right back, and generally around 45 works quite nicely. We go into really wide territory here, and my angle is looking a bit too far up, too much sky. I like to on the POVs that I get, I like to be able to see some of the buoyancy aid and the arms. Yeah, I want to see some of that torso. I don't want it just to be the boat. You know, you might disagree, but hey, you've got full control over it here. You can go to the exact framing that you want, but I want a really ultra wide shot here. Kind of go to extremes a little bit, but we still have this fisheye distortion. I mean, it's all, you know, it's pretty good, but it gives us a nice immersive POV. But I want to get rid of that fisheye distortion, so I'm going to set this to 100, which generally gets rid of it all. And that's stretched it out, and you know, we'll go a little bit blurry at the edges of the frame. You know, there's only so much you can do with even 8K resolution, but you know, you've got full control over this, so you can get that compromise. If you don't want to go as high as 100, you can get a bit of a compromise between the two. It's entirely up to you. Play around with it and see what you prefer best in your videos. So I've advanced the camera a bit further along here, so I want to adjust this tilt a little bit more, 51 say, and I've still got enough at the top of the screen here to show the river ahead, but I've also got this nice view of the boat going you know, in front, and you get much more of a sense of speed because the environment coming past you and below you is part of what's going to give you that sense of speed. So if you're working with MTB footage, that's something to bear in mind when you're doing these reframes. So that's our basic shot there. Now if we go back to our edit timeline, in Fusion, you know, we get this big area here. We can zoom in a little bit to make it bigger. But if we go back to our main timeline, oh, it's got this black space all around it. So what can we do about that? Well, that's where the crop comes in. So on our scaling, we need to make sure that our reframe video is set to crop, and that will bring it back up to the full screen. So the fill version doesn't work, even though technically you would have thought it would do. Stretch doesn't either, really, it does something funky. So yeah, the correct setting here is crop, and that will fill the screen with the full size image. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. But the Reframe plugin is capable of more. So what I like to do sometimes with these videos where it's just POV, I want to add a little bit of spice into the shot. And for that, I will often do a camera movement, and sometimes I'll go make it a pretty funky camera movement as well. So we've got a basic reframe here, and I'm going to go about 10 frames in, and I'm going to add a keyframe for all of for the main rotation, tilt, and pan parameters. What I can do now is I'm going to bring this shot all the way around to me. You don't want to really see my face. We've got a bit of a stitch line here, but this is only going to be on here for a fraction of a second. And then that can give us a pan intro to the shot, but I'm going to go a little bit further, and I'm going to go a bit bonkers here, and I'm going to set this to -360, which, you know, is still the right way up from the start of it, but now we get this nice funky camera movement. Now the movement is a little bit robotic at the moment, so we'll sort that out in a moment. But one thing that we can do to make this look a lot better within the GoPro Reframe plugin is if we go to the advanced controls here, and we can turn motion blur on, and we can select our shutter angle, and as you can see, that's given us a load of motion blur at the beginning of the shot. And you know, this does increase the amount of processing overhead, but it does add a nicer look to things. I might just reduce it just a little bit, to be honest. Some motion blur is better than some, but I think this camera move here is a little bit too quick. So first of all, I'm going to smooth it off. I'm going to make it look a bit better, a bit smoother. So I open the spline tab here, and this brings this up here. I need to tick the GoPro Reframe here, and let's find out where are they all? Ah, they're there. So one thing with this, so yeah, bring that vertical height down. As I say, Fusion isn't the most intuitive thing in the world to use, but so we can see our keyframes here for pan, tilt, and rotate, and I'm just going to highlight them all. You can do Command A or Control A on a PC, and that highlights all our keyframes. And then I can go to this icon down here and click Smooth, and now because it's so quick, it goes so quick, so it's probably not as obvious as it could be, but I'm going to change that. So I'm going to go to keyframes, take the splines off. Let's just zoom in here. So I'm going to open the GoPro Reframe tab there, and I'm going to select all of these keyframes here. So these are my final keyframes. I'm just going to drag them out just a little bit. A bit nicer. It's alright, there's a little bit of an intro to the shot. Just to spice things up, you might think it's a bit over the top, but I do like to do this with these 360 POV videos, just to add a little bit of variety to things at the beginning and maybe the end of the shot sometimes. It's got the motion blur in there. It's looking pretty good. So that's our little bit of a shot for POV, just showing you what you can do with the Reframe plugin. So I mentioned earlier about the 360 cameras being great for filming other people. And that's the thing with this, because with a 360 camera, you can relax a little bit on the day when you're filming, because like when I'm out kayaking with friends, I don't want to be really thinking too much about the camera. I want to be enjoying my day just as much as everyone else. The only thing with a 360 camera is that you need to put the effort in post and editing. Standard action cameras are the other way around. You have to think a bit more when you're using them on the location and at the time, but then editing is easier. So it's kind of a case of choose your poison. Personally, I do prefer to enjoy my day more and deal with stuff in editing, but you might be different. But the great thing about the 360 cameras, as I mentioned, is that you can get shots of what's happening with your friends on the day, and you don't really have to think too much about it because you can reframe the camera afterwards. So I've got this shot, and if we go into Fusion, again, it doesn't really look like, it looks like the POV shot like I had before, but we're going to change that. So I'm going to add the GoPro Reframe. I'm also just going to make sure that the scaling of this is set to crop as well. Okay, and then I need to select my projection. So I want my lens curve, say 100, just to get rid of distortion. And this time I'm going to zoom in a fair amount. You can get away with quite a bit, and especially if this is going to be watched on mobile screens, you can get away with quite a lot here. And just bring the tilt down. But I don't want to go too over the top with the zoom, because I could go all the way up here, but then you really do start to see the lack of resolution. But I'm going to go to 140 here, just to be a bit of a compromise. If we go back to the edit, see this full screen, see it's not that bad. It's pretty good actually. And so this is a lady by the name of Sally who was pretty gutsy. She decided she was going to go into this big stopper at the bottom of a feature called ski jump. It's a pretty meaty feature, but she was on a C1, so she's only got one blade, so she has a lot of skill to be able to do that. She went over, but fair play to her for even giving that a go. I've seen some proper beaterings going on in that hole. So, but this shows the flexibility of a 360 camera and how, even if you're filming POV most of the day, you can still record your friends. And I put this shot at the end of the edit, which is cool. So now that you've seen a bit of how you can use the GoPro Reframe plugin, now we need to look at the grading of the image and how I graded this. So before I go into the grading of this, if you've made it this far in the video, if you're liking it, please do remember to like the video and maybe subscribe to the channel if you like the kind of content that I make. It really does just help me out. And if you've made it this far, then please do drop a blue heart in the comments. Again, it really helps me with things like the algorithm and all that malarkey. But yeah, let's get on with the rest of the video. Okay, so let's talk about the grading aspect of this. So it's going to be very similar to what I showed on my D-Log M grading video. But obviously, as I mentioned at the start of this video, I now change my color management settings to Rec 709A, but my timeline working color space is DaVinci Wide Gamut stroke intermediate. So I'm going to come to the grading tab here. Now I have made a grade previously and it's not perfected, but it's generally where I want it, give or take. But I'll just take you through what I have here. The first thing I do when I'm working with the GoPro GP-Log footage, which is what this was shot in, is I use a plugin called Cinematch, and it's made by the same people as Film Convert. It's a fabulous plugin because you can make your camera look like any other camera. They've really scientifically gone in there at a very deep level and made it so you can pretty much get an exact match of different cameras. So the one I like working with, obviously I'm working with a Max2. I don't think they've got the Max2 available, but the GP-Log is basically the same anyway across these GoPro cameras. So I put my input as a GoPro Hero 12 in log, and I get really nice results, I think, from setting it to a Panasonic S1 Vlog. That's my main camera that I use, my main mirrorless camera. So if I am into cutting GoPro footage with that, then that's what I generally tend to use. But you can make it look like an Arri, an Affinity, a Red, whatever you want to look like, and you just download the profiles for it. You don't have to do this though. You don't have to have this plugin at all. And if you don't have the Cinematch plugin, and cost of living is expensive these days, and not everyone can afford to go out splashing money on new bits of software all the time, but you don't need Cinematch. The first node in your grading tree should be a color space transform. Now, I've got it set here as my input as a Panasonic V-Gamut and a Panasonic Vlog, and that's because I've used the Cinematch plugin. But if you don't have Cinematch, then you want to set this for GP-Log. Despite the fact it is a log profile, you still want to set that to Rec 709 and your input to Rec 709 as well. And then your output color space is going to be DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. So that gives you the widest, most expansive color space to be working within when you're grading it. The next I have is a parallel node tree here. And when I want to add a new node, instead of adding a serial one, I'll add a parallel, and that will add one below. And this gives me my basic look. And I've got one for exposure. I've got one for the general look and one for contrast. You might have one for the curves. You might have a separate one for saturation. I don't like putting multiple adjustments in the same grading node. If we separate them out and we label them, we can keep things nice and neat, and we can see exactly what each of these nodes is doing, as opposed to doing multiple adjustments in different areas and not knowing what's going on when we come back to it later. So make it nice and neat, have a single adjustment type on each of these nodes, and it keeps it nice and neat and tidy. On my look node here, I haven't really done a whole lot with this. I'm just before I go into that though, I'm going to take you to the last node in the tree, and that is a DCTL, and I've downloaded this JP2499G DLT. There's a few of these different ones available, and it converts that wide gamut color space back into Rec 709, Gamma 2.4 or 2.2 if you want, but I work within 2.4. It's the industry standard. DCTLs are only available on the studio version of Resolve. You can't use them within the free version. So if you've got the free version, you will want to use another color space transform, and basically you just change your input to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate, and then your output color space you will set to Rec 709 and then Rec 709 2.2 or Rec 709 2.4. But I have the studio version and I like using the DCTLs. These give a really nice look. I find they've got a really pleasing look to them. And as I say, there are different ones available online. They're free. And some of them give a slightly different look and feel. But I do find them to be superior to just doing a color space transform. But as I say, it's only available as an option to you if you're using the studio version of Resolve. So if we go back to this, so my look, I haven't really done a whole lot. Most of my look is achieved by this DCTL, but I have added a little bit of contrast to the image. I set my pivot point to 335 because that generally means that it's pivoting the contrast around middle grey, what is technically middle grey, so you don't get great big exposure jumps when you're adjusting the contrast. It's a good all-round point to put your pivot point, that is 3.335. As far as the look's concerned, again, I haven't done a whole lot. I've just kind of tinted these dark areas a little bit. It's probably so subtle you might not even see it, but a little bit towards the blue. And this part of the shadow, I've nudged a little bit towards the red. I just played around. It's just a look that I played around with for a while, and it's just very subtle. I'm not really doing a massive amount, but it's enough to give the image a kind of a distinctive look, but without being too bog standard. So, you know, you may or may not like it. I don't know. It's all subjective. So, but that's generally where I go with the grade. And then with the exposure, I tend to use the HDR option here, because when you adjust exposure with this, it tends to adjust exposure in a similar way to the way your camera adjusts exposure. It behaves in a similar way and gives similar results, as opposed to using the offset adjustment here. Now, one thing I can look at is here, if I use the qualifier, we've got our vector, our waveform here. And the highlights on my hands, what are they, about 640. So I can bring that back up. Obviously, I've got to be careful of this water. I don't want the white water to blow out. But this kind of exposure level here at 640, between 640 and 768 is a good exposure level for human skin. Again, I can check here. It's around the same level. But yeah, around this sort of 640 to 768 area for human skin is a good exposure level to have. Obviously being careful of other aspects of your image and careful not to blow them out as well. But we can see here on that highlight on my skin there, that's hovering between 640 and 768. So I can see that is a good balanced exposure, and I can see from the waveform that it is as well. On the vector scope now, my dry suit is quite bright. As you can see, it's yellow and red, quite extremes. Skin, I just want to point out that as you can see, my skin here is pretty much on the skin tone indication line here on the vector scope. It's important to note though that your skin does not have to be exactly on that line, because different people have different tones of skin. And we're not all going to be exactly on that skin line. I tend to be sort of pasty white, so I tend to fall pretty much directly on the skin tone line. But you can be either side of it. You can be a little bit too red, a little bit too more towards the yellow. Obviously not in extremes. You don't want extremes of that. But don't fall for the myth that the skin has to fall exactly on that skin tone line. It doesn't. You do have a little bit of leeway. And obviously if you're filming in a sunset or something and there's orange light, well, if you grade that back to the skin tone line, then you might end up grading out to all those beautiful sunset colours. So, you know, be careful of that and be mindful of the scenario in which your footage is being taken. But anyway, yeah, my dry suit is really bright yellow and red. And so it's bordering on oversaturated potentially. It's in line with this yellow box. I don't generally tend to want to go beyond these indication boxes if I can, because you can end up pushing things truly into oversaturation. So if I add a node here, and I'll call it saturation, and I'm going to really ramp it up, and we'll see what happens. Looks pretty horrible, doesn't it? Amazingly, it hasn't clipped hugely, but yeah, it's pretty nasty. But generally I wouldn't really want it much more saturated than it already is. You know, I'm just on the default and already that yellow is bordering. So be mindful of that. If you find that one color is going to oversaturation and you want a bit more control over things, then we can use a thing called color slice. That's this tab here. We also have this color warper as well, which we had in the previous version of Resolve. But the color slice is what I like to use now. You have all these different tones, colors here that you can adjust individually. And because my dry suit is yellow, I can go to this yellow tab here and I can reduce the saturation here. So I can just dial it back a bit if I want. But I'm okay with it as it is. I like the bright colours in this. But you've got that option if you want to adjust a particular colour tone. And you've also got the colour warper here as well as another option that can achieve a similar thing. But yeah, I mean, that's generally what I use to grade GP-Log. My last one here, because I use the camera set to low sharpness. I don't like a digitally over-enhanced image, so I always set my cameras to the lowest sharpness settings. And generally, in the sharpen tab, 0.47 I think gives a good sharpening effect. You might not see this effect, but if I turn that tab, yeah, it's very, very subtle. If you look at this zip tag here, if I turn the sharpness off and turn it back on again, and again on this immersion research and maybe these logos here, it's just a subtle effect. Just brings enough definition back into things. Subtle, but I find that's a good balance. But yeah, that's basically where we are with color grading GP-Log footage. And then when I export my file, I want to set for YouTube, I use the quality on automatic. Anytime I use the recommended bitrate settings for YouTube, especially with the fast moving action here, it just looks a mess. So I use the automatic quality setting here, and my color space tag is Rec 709, and importantly my gamma tag is Rec 709A. And that will ensure now that this output, once I've uploaded it to YouTube or play it in QuickTime or whatever, will look the same as it does in Resolve. There is one setting that I have forgotten to tell you about, and that's in the Resolve preferences. And so we need to go to the General tab and tick the automatically tag Rec 709 scene clips as Rec 709A, and use Mac Display Color Profile for viewers. Viewers match QuickTime Player when using Rec 709 scene, and that's an important setting to have when we're doing this Rec 709A output in terms of getting things to all match up from our working timeline. So I hope this video has been of use to some of you. If you'd like to know more about creating footage with the 360 cameras, please do let me know. And if you've made it this far into the video, that's absolutely amazing. If you could leave me a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel as well, that would really help me out. And I'll see you all in the next video.